Good morning, Abhay.
Good morning, Raja.
I'm very happy that you could take time to have this conversation with me. For the audience, can you introduce yourself?
My name, of course, Abhay Phadnis. I work as a consultant and as a coach. So, primarily in the leadership capacity building space, working with organizations to build their leadership pipeline, working with individuals and teams as a coach for greater effectiveness. I've been doing this on my own now for the past almost 17 years. Before that, I worked in industry for over 20 years, doing various roles: HR, management, information management, and so on. So that's roughly the scope of work. Basically, trained in psychology and then in HR. That's the academic part. And other than work, enjoy a few things like crosswords and music and cooking and poetry in different languages. That's roughly me.
Thanks, Abhay. You attended the Thinking Partnership course. The question I want to ask you is what do you want to think about, and what are your thoughts about your experience of the Thinking Partnership course?
I have attended two aspects of that course. One has been the thinking practice. So working with it in different modes of thinking conversations. And then one specific to thinking partnership, one-on-one thinking. I think the first time when I did the course, it was simply discovering a very different way of talking with someone or even thinking in a group where so we do often talk about things like don't interrupt, listen fully, listen without getting in the way of the person who's speaking. That's often we say that when we talk about how to have a conversation with someone fully. I think what this particular technique brought home was the importance of quite literally removing yourself from the other person's way. Being there to connect, being there to ask the follow-up questions, being there to listen, but not letting oneself become a factor in the thinking process. I'm reminded of in qualitative research, there's this phenomenon people talk about called self-reflexivity, which is essentially the impact that I, as the researcher, have on the research. How do my views of thinking, when I'm talking to someone, how does my own way of talking, thinking, etc., influence the responses that I get? I think this method essentially takes care of that to a very, very large extent, where I can be reasonably sure that what I'm hearing are the other person's unfiltered, authentic thoughts. I'm doing very little, if anything, to influence that in any way. So I think it was quite refreshing and quite rewarding to discover it that first time around when I worked with it. Second time around, when the Thinking Partnership course was there, I was coming to that. So since this was specifically now two people working together, a coach identity in me got awakened more because that's very much like a coaching angle there. That is where I started having thoughts about if I were to use this in coaching, what would happen? And I think I started out more or less saying not likely, because as a coach, we keep talking about the importance of powerful questions and not using my own line of thinking and questioning, but rather going according to the flow that's laid out in the thinking process itself. I had almost written it off saying for coaching, I don't think this will work. Let me see if it works for other kinds of conversations that one may have. And I think what I saw there, the way the thinking partnership process is designed, where there's equal time given to each person if you're doing it both ways. Right? There's two things struck me about that. One is that there's a certain mutuality. It's not as if I'm doing someone a favor by listening to them, or they are doing me a favor by listening to me. There's a certain mutuality in the process. Second thing that struck me about the process was that there is a certain inbuilt equality in the two partners. In a coaching relationship, while we do talk about equality, however subtle, however low key, there is a certain power equation in that the coach is guiding the conversation in a certain way, not guiding the content of the conversation, but the coach is guiding the process in a certain way. Here, I think the fact that both of us are coming at it with the same level of knowledge of the process, and both of us are going to use exactly the same process with each other, I think that itself creates a kind of equality, which makes it easier to share and work with the process. I'm still not sure about in a coaching context. I have tried it with a couple of people who are not really coaching clients per se, but fellow coaches who are also working along with me. I've tried using this to some extent in a coaching context as well. I'm still not clear how it will work there. Also, something which I'd voiced even in the workshop as we were doing it, I am still not clear exactly how this would work when we have a very reserved person at the other end, someone who doesn't speak up easily, someone who's not very articulate naturally. Would it require more pushing, prodding? How would that work with the discipline of this process? I still don't have firm answers, but what I have seen and experienced for myself is one, the sense of freedom that I had when being the thinker and responding to someone just asking me these questions. Sense of freedom and flow that I found as I was thinking in that mode, I think was something I really treasured. As the listener, as the one asking questions, I discovered the ability to just be there. I often tell people they're talking fuzzily when they say things like hold the space. But I think this is one technique where I actually see the importance of that. Just being there, holding the space, being a container. We use all these terms, but I think how one can do that without becoming a factor in the thinking oneself, as I said earlier, I think that really struck me about the whole process. Both as listener and as thinker, I've seen the way that it has added immense value to my own set of conversational to my conversational repertoire, if I can say that. What else strikes me about the thinking partnership? I think that's roughly the sum of what I can recall from the two programs.
Why? What more do you think or feel or want to say?
I think this follow-up question that you asked right now, when I started doing this in the first workshop, or even in the thinking partnership, I remember this question starting to feel like, or rather starting out feeling as if it might be a bit of a repetitive question and a bit of a nuisance question. If someone has already spoken for a long time and you're again asking them, what more do you think or feel or want to say? But I think two things about that question later struck home. One was, I remember you making a point of this in the workshop as well, that it's not what do you think or feel or want to say, right? So that's not how the question is being asked, right? Each element that we are breaking up there, what do you think or feel or want to say? I realized when receiving that question, that the question does something. While we do pay a lot of attention to the cognitive aspect, I think the way the question is phrased also makes one look at what else is happening behind the cognitive part. Right? And I almost always find myself responding to the middle portion of that question, which is feeling when that question comes up, this especially for the second time or the third time. I think right now also when you ask that question, what came up was this feeling. So two feelings that are still there about this particular thing. One is curiosity. So what more can this do? It's something that I'm curious about. I've used it in some contexts. What else can it do? The two questions I said earlier about how will it work in coaching, how will it work with someone who's not a very vocal person. But I think that the curiosity around that is something that I carry. And the second thing that I'm conscious of in terms of feeling is a sense of gratitude to this process, because in working with this process, even as part of the practice that we did, and in the course, we also had to have one-on-one thinking sessions in between the workshops. So there was a practice ground that you had created, and in those, I think I can clearly recall at least two of the conversations where I was thinking it wasn't mocks. We were picking up things that were actually important to us and using this as to think about that. And I can remember at least 2 such sessions where the thinking created a path forward, brought about some clarity, opened some doors. Now, what I was talking about there was not something I'd not thought about earlier. It wasn't something that was completely new. But the flow of that, it's okay, it's a little difficult for me to articulate this, but it's like a large part of the thinking partnership flow feels as if one is having a conversation with oneself. The other person is very much there, and I'm very grateful that the other person is there. But because the other person is not reacting, responding, probing explicitly, it is the conversation, my thinking is going on. And so I can think on my own also, right? I don't need someone in front of me. If I have the topic, I can start thinking on my own. And about these topics I'm thinking of, I had already done my own thinking around it. I'd even tried some amount of writing around one. But I think the fact of an actual conversation and there being someone I'm talking to somehow made it more alive, somehow made it more natural in terms of factually describing something to someone else rather than just saying, oh, I already know this. While the other person was not expected to explicitly step in and ask me or follow up or agree with me or understand what I was saying, there was, I think, what is a very human need to be sure that the other person is understanding what I'm saying. There is an attempt to explain it, even though I already think I know. And I think in that process, I ended up, when I was laying it out in a way that I thought the other person would understand it, I realized that I was seeing parts of the issue that I myself had not seen or had not seen through that angle, or some specific part of it I had not seen directly. I think that came up quite strongly. So it's like having a conversation with oneself with the luxury of having someone else also in front of you to hear you. It brought up aspects which I had not looked at earlier, even though I had thought about it in depth. There is also a feeling of immense gratitude for that, because at least in one of those cases, it led to some direct action on my part on whatever I was thinking about at that point. Feeling question does seem to matter a lot. One more point that came up as I was talking through this process right now. I think almost by definition in a thinking partnership, we are talking about two different, we're talking about our own things. I do remember one variant of this in the first course I did, where it could be the same topic also that we are looking at, but using the same approach. But here in this process specifically, we are talking about two different things. And yet, so I need to explore this better. I don't have an answer for why it happened or whether it'll happen each time. I don't know. But in almost all the conversations that I can recall, while we were talking about two completely different things, it seemed as if there was a certain continuity, a certain flow, a certain commonality in what was coming up, not in terms of content. But I perhaps shouldn't have brought this up because I don't have ready-made words to explain this. But there is a certain congruence that seems to come up in the conversation, a certain coherence. While we are talking about two completely different things, talking in our own ways, using our own words, using our own flow of thinking, somehow they are 90 minutes, whatever we are spending, half of that each way, seems to come together as an organic thing. And as I said, I don't have words to describe it better, more a feeling than a thought, but that's also what stayed with me. I think I'm done.
Abhay, what more do you think or feel or want to say?
I don't think there's anything specific really. Just want to see how this can be deployed, want to see what more can be done with this. I don't think beyond that, nothing active right now.
As an experienced coach, right, you have been certified in multiple forms and multiple approaches. So, with that as a reality, what is the additional learning or value you found in the thinking partnership course?
One, while as I said, I haven't used this explicitly in my coaching, as a coach, from the time that I first learned coaching formally in 2006, and the person who taught me, he would keep making this thing of keep making a big deal out of saying that take yourself out of the equation. And it seemed counterintuitive because we were also being told that you need to be alert, attentive, asking the right questions, etc. But he would keep saying this, he would keep using this phrase repeatedly, take yourself out of the equation. It took a long time to understand what he meant by that. Not to bring in or rather to minimize. I don't think it's possible to take it out completely, but to minimize my biases, my thoughts, my mental models when I'm working with this person. Another phrase that comes up often is to cede centrality to the other person. I think that has been something that I've consciously tried to keep doing as a coach from that very first lesson with him. In this technique, I saw a certain way of doing that very seamlessly, very effectively. But in coaching, the importance still that is there of the whole thing of powerful questions. In my own mind, I don't yet have a way of reconciling these two in terms of a coaching technique. But where it has definitely helped is even when I'm having a coaching conversation with someone, practicing to whatever extent I can the discipline of listening from this model, I think is something I'm consciously trying to do. And I do believe it is helping make listening that little bit better for me. It's not an explicit application of the whole process, but some elements of it I'm trying to weave into what I do. I am curious about using this as a coaching technique. I have not done it yet. Partly, I haven't got trained in using it as a coach. Partly, I think it's also, I have spoken to a couple of coaching clients about the approach overall from an information sharing perspective. I think what is coming up in my mind as one likely, I would call it barrier, but one factor to look at if I were to think of using this as a coach, is the way that coaching is understood currently in the market. So working with a client, there's a certain expectation of what a coach should bring. And one of the biggest things that coaches are expected to bring, I'm repeating this again, is powerful questions. Working in a mode where the client is not going to see me or hear me say anything more than a certain set of prompts for thinking rather than anything else. I'm not sure how that'll sit with a coaching client who is paying for the coaching and is expecting some specific flow in what they understand as coaching. I haven't resolved that in my mind as yet how it will work. But I can see some coaches who I've worked with for some time and where this thing of them needing to feel that they've been coached in quotes is not very strong, where they are finding value in the conversation, where they are seeing for themselves that it's more about them discovering things rather than me telling them something. I think for clients who've worked with me for some time and who see that process within themselves, I'm tempted to try it there and see how it can work. But beyond that, I haven't consciously thought about it in coaching. But the element of listening a lot more deeply, a lot more self-effacingly, I think is something that I can definitely see adding a lot of value here.
Thank you, Abhay. As usual, I just want to appreciate you. And in this conversation, I think there are two qualities that I think came up very, very strongly. One is your authenticity.
Thank you.
That is one quality. The second one, I don't know whether I'm using the right word. I have heard people talking about orthogonal thinking. What I understand when I say this is looking at the same time from different perspectives. That is the second quality I noticed, which I also want to appreciate.
Thank you, sir. And if I may say something, we've had conversations several times, and I think what came through again was the complete intentness with which you listen, which makes it easy to talk.
Thank you, Abhay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.